Hey folks, long time no see. Adrian Amos out here on the first day of spring 2026. 2 weeks ago marked the announcement officially that Microsoft is dropping an E7 on us. It's not here yet, it'll be here May 1. But it's kind of funny because it's something that for years Microsoft insisted that it was not on their development roadmap. They had originally, when they first got to E5, looked at what would step-ups be, but they decided it was not aligned with their goals at the time. And I'm actually going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into an analogy video on why I think it makes sense, but I do think it makes sense. And it makes sense for me in the context of some broader shifts I'm seeing in the compliance and security landscape. So, coming fresh off of a whole bunch of customer meetings and leadership conversations and participation and attendance in a lot of recent cybersecurity conferences, I've noticed that we are entering a phase that I am calling the post-security era. And what do I mean by that? So, I don't mean that nobody has security tools. In fact, I kind of think we got to a point where there's such a commodity that we don't really think about it as much anymore. 10 years ago, when we first started doing what we called security immersion experiences, it's part of a Microsoft program to go out and spread the gospel about how Microsoft is a very powerful security organization with great tooling. The conversation then was trying to convince organizations that it was worth their time to have an actual dedicated security budget. Maybe 5-6 years ago, right about the time of the pandemic, we started realizing that that conversation had landed to the point where we were entering scenarios where people already had a broad array of security solutions. Sometimes it was Microsoft, sometimes it wasn't. That battlefield was very, very complex for a while, right? You saw all of them working desperately to undercut each other's market share, whether it was EDRs or CASBs or whatever. But over the last 15 months, I don't think I've talked to a customer that doesn't have one of those solutions. And they're all generally pretty happy with what they've got. The dissatisfaction may come in the level of support they get or how their particular MSSP is configuring it, monitoring it, whatever. But that space is settled to the point where there's not really a conversation to be had about you need this latest and greatest EDR. They've already got it. And that takes me back to a conversation that I started having, or a framing device that I created about 10 years ago. It's mine, I own it. The user's pyramid of influence. And if you've ever attended one of my in-person events, you may have heard me talk about this. But we generally have 4 levels of user interaction or influence on our data, okay? And they are the identity, which sits at the top of the pyramid. One account, one credential gains you access into a few devices. That's your next layer. The next layer down is your apps, broader, wider, more than you have devices. And then finally, all that gets down into your data. Now, where I think the conversation about commodities becomes really interesting is that, again, 10 years ago, even outside of the conversation of what EDR do you have, you were constraining your business operations at the decision point of which type of devices do you want to support, right? Is it going to be Macs? Is it going to be PCs? Is it going to be Android, iOS, whatever? You're not penalized on that anymore. You're not even really penalized on which tools monitor, which tools configure, which tools govern. There's some advantages to being in the Microsoft space, and again, I think that's going to be a different video, because that's actually where I've had the most success talking about the Microsoft security stack, is not actually looking at the solutions themselves, but how they interoperate. Anyway, so going back to E7 and why I think it's really interestingly relevant right now. If you already have E5, then you already have the entire Defender stack, right? There's nothing to be gained there. In fact, as of I think July 1 this year, you're even going to get Security Copilot baked in. What you don't have, though, is some of the bolt-on elements to identity management and some of the productivity capabilities around data creation and management. E7 doesn't expand those 2 layers. It does literally nothing across the 2 layers of devices. And I'll say apps, although somebody's going to fight me, and I welcome the comment. It doesn't do anything across those layers. It does everything at the identity and data layers. And that coalesces or converges really conveniently around a conversation that I've been framing up for the last 6 months, that in this back half of this decade, our conversations around security as it relates to AI enablement begin and end with identity and data. E7 fits that bill. I actually have a demo environment that I show pretty regularly on business webinars and corporate previews and demos and whatnot that is licensed, funny enough, with E5, Microsoft's identity governance capabilities in Intra, and Copilot. That exact combination of licenses is E7, and if I go to E7, then for absolutely free in that environment, I also get all the Foundry and all that other stuff available in a pricing tier that licensed sellers can discount. There's some real power there. Because previously there's no other way to get access to licensing bundles and discounts that include Copilot. So, it's not an E7 sales pitch. It is really interesting timing though, because it aligns exactly to what I have seen as a shift in the industry, where people aren't interested in buying the latest and greatest EDR, the latest and greatest TASB, antivirus, whatever. They're really interested in how do I enable users to use the workloads where I want them to make sure that the data remains protected and that their identities are more secure and less susceptible to identity attacks. So, join me as I continue this journey, this exact ride. And we'll talk a little bit more about how some of these things break down and ways to look at them if you're thinking about any of this for your business. Anyway, happy spring. Catch you next time.